Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to do a rare unicorn of a video, a type of video that I do not do all that frequently, a drunk review. So in order to adequately prepare myself to do this drunk review, I've got some Fireball whiskey here. And if you're wondering why this is half empty, that's because I'm married and what's mine is yours and all that. Funny how that only ever applies to like head colds and liquor. I'm just kidding. My husband's like the most generous person alive. I'm going to serve this Fireball whiskey ever so elegantly in a cocktail glass with a giant ice cube, as though this spicy nightmare liquid is some sort of fine bourbon or something. I thought Fireball would be appropriate, not because they've sponsored me or anything, although they totally should, look me up, but because today I'm going to be reviewing The Library Book by Susan Orlean. That both hurts and feels good. What you have here is a smooth whiskey with a fiery kick of red-hot cinnamon. It tastes like heaven, burns like hell. What happens next is up to you. So book reviewing then? If you weren't aware, this is a nonfiction book that discusses, amongst other things, the devastating fire that happened at the Los Angeles Library in 1986. This choice of alcohol is not meant to make light of the situation whatsoever. That fire was brutal. It burned for more than 7 hours, destroying 400,000 books and damaging 700,000 more. I chose Fireball for this video because this book doesn't just discuss the 1986 fire. It also talks about a bunch of different yet still associated topics, including fires themselves and how they're fought by firefighters. This was, and continues to be, the worst library fire ever recorded in American history. But while it was happening, it was largely ignored by the media, and not because it wasn't big news, but because the Chernobyl nuclear disaster was unfolding at the exact same time. Everyone's eyes were on this potentially catastrophic global event, leaving very little print space for the library fire, ironically enough. But this book gives the fire the spotlight that it's due, discussing all the details that are known about the fire, and also re-examining the case against the man who was suspected of setting the fire. But more than that, this book is really broad in its focus. It gives you a ton of different historical elements that really showcase a very specific window of time in LA's history. We're told almost immediately that the library was old. It opened in 1926 and it was not in great shape. It was well known that the place was a fire hazard. There were no sprinklers, no fire inhibiting doors that most modern buildings have. There was just like a whole menu of fire code violations. It was also not the most hospitable place to be in the Los Angeles heat. A particularly memorable passage of the book discusses how heat would blast from the radiators all day long, regardless of season. Librarians would record how hot it would get inside the building, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit on some days. That didn't bode well. And then, in the morning of a day in late April 1986, a fire broke out. But not just any fire. A fire that had just the right elements necessary to become an uncontrollable monster. And this is not hyperbole. This is a type of fire that has needs so specific that it is rarely seen, like barely ever, outside of a laboratory. This ended up being really helpful for Orlean's storytelling because this is the type of fire that firefighters will recall vividly, since very few of them, if any, will see a fire like this in their lifetime. Terrifying, but almost magnificent to behold. The fire had no color. It was see-through. Into this story of the fire, Orlean weaves a narrative thread of the man who would go on to be accused of setting the fire. He was a very eccentric, aspiring actor who couldn't seem to get his story straight, or rather seemed to live in parallel realities simultaneously. But more than being a comprehensive history of this fire, which I certainly consider this book to be, this book is like a long love letter to libraries, and it's more than just a gush fest. It talks about libraries' purpose in society, and more practically it talks about their historical uses versus how people use them today. To make things personal for a second, I grew up on the cusp of the technological revolution. So as the information era came of age, so did I. It's always been really weird to have experienced the world both pre and post-internet in such a transformative period of my life. But because I was so young in those days pre-internet, it's hard for me to go back mentally to what the world was like back then. So even just logistically, it was really cool for me to hear about how libraries were used back in the 1980s. And Orlean does such a great job of making you feel like you're standing at the doors of the old Central Library with all of this knowledge, but also radiator heat just washing over you like a wave. This shit is the devil's work. I should have more. Look at the artistry. They're making it look all singed. Ignite the night. But I also really valued her almost question to the reader about what purpose libraries serve now, as public spaces, as central hubs for information, or even as cures for the loneliness and isolation that our constantly connected generation seems to ail from. I don't think I need to say this, but I will anyway. Libraries have been and continue to be so important to me. I was actually lucky enough to get a guest spot on a video that Amy Gets Lit did during National Library Week, where I got to talk about just how much they mean to me. But they're not just about the books. Their value extends so far past that. I think that's why this tale of a library burning isn't just about the loss of the books. Well, it is, but it isn't. When a library is destroyed, it's a loss for that entire community. One of the most heartening things about this book was how the community came together to save as many books as possible. And my science geek self was so excited to hear the details of how they went about getting some of these damaged books back into shape where they could anyway. But also the outpour of love and supports and the fundraising that everyone did to try to get a new library built. It's such an interesting book. I have a real fondness for books that can take a bunch of different interconnected subjects and make them work together all in one place. It's a grab bag type of book. It has a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It doesn't get cutesy, but it's really clever in its organization. To keep things from getting too scattered, every chapter is led with card catalog entries, with titles that have something to do with what's about to be discussed in that chapter, which I just thought was brilliant. These little details to give this book a library feel while also keeping you focused. I do highly recommend this book. It's one that will be on my mind for a long time to come, if only for the feeling of it. While I will never get to set foot in the original Central Library in 1986 Los Angeles, unless time travel becomes a thing and somehow I can afford it, this book made me feel like I could. It's extremely evocative in its language and sophisticated in its structure. At the end of the day, this book does what the library does. It takes a bunch of seemingly random information and puts it all into one place in a way that unifies. So those were all of my tipsy thoughts on The Library Book by Susan Orlean. As of the present moment, I have had enough Fireball for several lifetimes. If you've read this book, if you've heard about this book, or you're now interested in reading this book after hearing me talk about it, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. But you can also find me on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you in the next video. Bye.